Hey, it's Scotty from Zenium Real Wealth, and today is Thursday lunchtime. So, g'day to everyone who's having their lunch at this point in time. I'll be having mine shortly. All right, today we're talking about due diligence. Due diligence sounds like a big word, huh? But essentially, all it means is looking into stuff before you do something. The thing is, the topic's branded around quite a lot, and it can very much just be a little bit scary for some people to know what to do or what it even means. So we're going to take you through a couple of steps today that hopefully should help you on this journey when you come to buy a property or sell a property and you need to do something with due diligence. All right, I'm going to add my screen in here. Okay, so back. I'll just put that back here. Helps if you hit the right button, hey? Okay, let's try that again. We'll go big for you guys. All right, so due diligence. We're going to cover what it is, when you should use it, and how to do DD. So instead of saying due diligence all the time, we're going to do something that I'm sure no one's ever done before and cut it down and call it DD. Yeah, whatever. We're not talking darling daughter, we're talking due diligence. So we've got the 3 stages of due diligence process and the different applications of due diligence. So that is what we're looking at today. All right. So let's go into what is DD. All right, so to save me typing a whole bunch of stuff out, we jumped on Investopedia to give you a real description of what due diligence is. And for those guys that are listening to us and not watching, we'll read that out. So what is due diligence? Due diligence is an investigation or an audit of potential investment or product to confirm all facts. That may include the review of financial records. Due diligence refers to the research done before entering into an agreement or a financial transaction with another party. So investors perform due diligence before buying a security from a company, like it could be shares or whatever. Due diligence can also refer to investigation a seller performs on a buyer that might include whether the buyer has adequate resources to complete the transaction or not. Okay, so that's due diligence there. All right. So when should you use due diligence? All right. Well, when you're buying property, buying shares, if you're entering into an agreement with another person or an entity. So anytime that you're looking to do something financial or that has a burden on you down the track or immediately, you should be looking at DD. You can also, as it mentioned in the Investopedia description, you should be looking at it when you're selling an item or a service. You've got to check out the buyer. Now that can be a real big thing that you need to do if you are selling to a developer or there's a long-term contract that's in play on something that you're doing. So if you've got a block of land and you want to sell to a developer and you want to know that that person can actually fulfill the contract, then that's something that you want to look into as a seller. Today, we're going to focus a bit more on the buying aspect of DD, and that's what we'll talk about. All right. Let's see. I'll do this. Okay. How to DD properly on property. All right. So there's 3 main sections of the DD process when you're coming to do something when you're looking at buying property. That is the contract clause. That is the next one is the discovery, and then there's the action. Okay, so you've got to break your DD down into that. So you need to have a grasp of each of these steps, and we're going to talk about that right now. So with the contract clauses, that can be something that can be simple. However, your solicitor will probably recommend that it is a little bit more in depth. I'd also like to say that if you're looking at just your own home, there's a question if you want to do a DD clause or not, because depending on which state you're in will depend on the level of protection a buyer has in the contract by default or by design, by you ticking some boxes when you go through. So it's very important to know where you stand on that. But let's say we had to enter a DD clause. It could be something simple like this one. Okay, so I'll make this even bigger just so you guys can see perhaps a bit better. Contract is subject to a due diligence clause for 21 days from the contract date for the buyer to perform due diligence, and to be satisfied with the result on the contracted property. Okay, and I don't know where that clause came from, but it would be nice if they spelled diligence correctly. All right, it could also be something a lot more in-depth like this one, okay? And this is a clause that we have used when we have purchased some development sites and things like that. So due diligence, this contract is subject to and conditional upon the buyer conducting investigations and inquiries at the buyer's own cost with respect to the property and being satisfied in all respects with the results of the inquiries, including and without limitation, and you can see a solicitor has written this, survey of the title to the property, the terms of any grants of easement, restrictive covenant registered on the title to the property, any lease or license agreements relating to the tenancies of the property, zoning and the lawful use of the property, the requirements of any local or other competent authority having jurisdiction over the property, and the terms of any permissions, approvals, consents, requisitions of any local or other government authorities, and any other matter deemed by the buyer to be relevant to the purchase. The seller agrees to permit the buyer and its representatives to conduct the inquiries and permits the buyer access to the property at all reasonable times to carry out inquiries. So that's an access agreement. The parties agree that the buyer should be allowed a period of 21 days in which to conduct the inquiries. That's the DD timeframe. If the buyer is not satisfied in all respects with the results of the inquiries, then the buyer may, in its absolute discretion and without being required to give any reasons, deliver written notice to the seller or the seller's solicitor at any time on or before 5 p.m. of the date being 21 days from the date of contract, terminate this contract whereby the contract should be at an end, and all deposit money shall be refunded in full to the buyer. The parties agree that this clause has been inserted for the benefit of the buyer, and the buyer may at any time by notice in writing to the seller waive the benefit of this clause. So that's a very, very strong DD clause. Essentially, it's completely weighted in the buyer's favour. So if you're buying something that you wanted that clause in there, that's good for you. Obviously, that has to be an agreement in the negotiation of the contract. But it's a very powerful clause because it essentially means that you got 21 days to look into what you want to look into on the property, because it mentions certain things like surveying the title and easements, etc., but it's not limiting that. And therefore, by design of that clause, it says that if you're not happy with anything to do with that, you can pull the pin. So that is a hugely, hugely powerful clause there. And that's something to keep in mind if you want that much of a powerful clause. Make sure you talk to your solicitor about that. Okay, so in the discovery process of DD, so we've covered the contracting process. So, is it a small contract? Is it a large one? What needs to be done there? And now the flow chart. We've done a quick flow chart of how it works. So from the start of the contract time, let's go any bigger, yep. So you make inquiries related to your DD. So whether you've just got one sort of thing specific in mind for your DD, it might be a building inspection. If you don't have that clause and it's under DD, or it could be something related to your ability to cut off the land or whatever it might be. You make those inquiries, you receive that information back. Then you need to assess the information. So that's obviously reviewing it and that sort of thing. And then you've got to decide on the impact that it has, if any, to your purchase. Now that's the important thing, because that's the whole point of DD, right? Is you're looking, you're digging through, you're finding stuff, and then you're finding out what impact it's actually going to make. Hopefully it makes a nil or a positive impact in your purchase, but obviously you need to know if it makes a negative one, because then you can pull out of the deal if you got your proper DD clause. Okay, so action. All right, so after receipt of the info, you need to assess the impact. That's what we're touching on here. So that will then give you actions to take. So for example, if we're talking about buying a house, just your own home or investment property, and there is a building and pest clause in there. So that's part of a DD. It doesn't have its own clause. It does have its own clause. It doesn't necessarily have to be grouped under a DD clause, but it is part of the due diligence process. Right, so you get the building and pest inspection done, and it says the carport leaks or something like that. You got a choice, right? Because your contract is subject to DD or building and pest, whatever the clause is under. And you say, well, hang on a tick, this carport leaks, so I can't store my convertible Maserati in there because we all have one of them. and you decide then, well, okay, I'm going to go and get some costings, or my building inspector gave me some approximate costings to get it done, to get it fixed, and it comes back and it says it's going to cost $2,500 to get fixed. Okay, so you've got a choice. There's three things you can do. Okay, you can pull out of the contract under building and pest because there was a fault came up that you're not happy with. You can pay the 2.5, just accept it and pay and go on with the contract and deem that clause acceptable. Or you can renegotiate for a lower price and or repair. And that's the third option, but there's a couple of different ways you can do that. Obviously, if you know for certain it's going to be $2,500 for that repair, then you can just negotiate $2,500 off, right? And you can go and pay and get it done. If it's something that's not as simple as that, like perhaps there was unrepaired old termite damage, so we're not talking about current termites, but maybe there's old damage there that needs some more fix up, and it's very difficult to see when you start pulling sheets off the wall how far the damage has gone. Of course, that's a pretty big deal. Whether you really love the house, you want to still go into it, then perhaps you would negotiate for a repair that you get to oversee. So you're not sort of on the hook for the cost, right? But you do get it repaired at the seller's expense. Now, you've got to understand this is completely up to the seller. Let's just say you want to negotiate on this contract and it's $2,500 less to repair your carport. The seller can just say, well, no. And then you've got a choice. Again, do you pull out of the contract or do you keep going and you pay your $2,500? So this is the sort of thing that creates a whole bunch of decisions across the process. But it does give you things that are set in stone or sort of waypoints that you can make those decisions, and it will help you a lot when you're coming to buy your property, and it just puts those safeguards in place as you go through. Okay, we'll look at the three applications here: home, buying investment property, construction, like a house and land building, and then development. We're not going to spend too long on development. So your home can be quite a simple DD process, like we're touching on with the carport, which just could be a building and pest inspection and some council reports. But it's just as important, okay? Just because it's perhaps more simple and not as many steps involved doesn't mean it's any less important when you're DDing your own home or investment property. So there's some common ones here that we use with building and pest inspection, a pool inspection if it has a pool. Obviously, excuse me, that's different to a pool certificate. So when you have your pool safety certificate, we're not talking about that. We're literally talking about, does the pool leak? Is the equipment work? Is the chlorinator working? Because some of that stuff can really add up. And for the sake of adding it onto your building and pest inspection, if you've got a person who can do that, then that's a really good option with a pool. I mean, your own home, pools are great. Investment property, it's questionable, right? So you've got to look into that. The council and government searches, when you go through the process with your solicitor, they'll get to the point of saying, okay, what searches do you want to do now? And there is usually a massive list of searches and it's quite overwhelming. So you need to discuss that with the solicitor and look at certain scenarios of what should be good and done and what should be perhaps forgotten about. We're looking at a block of land for a client at the moment in New South Wales, and it's in a new area, and there's a whole bunch of searches you can do, but the land's not even titled yet. And the simple fact is that those searches would have had to have been done for the development approval to go through. So we probably don't need to do all those searches because they wouldn't have let the DA go through on that land if some of those things had happened, like a new rail going through or contaminated land or whatever it might be. There's skeletons 6 foot under. So whatever that is, you need to look at that. However, there is some things that you do need to consider. So for example, your rates, where are they paid? Your solicitor will always look at that and tell you where that's up to, because there'll be an adjustment at settlement on that. That's part of their DD process for you. Building permits on a house or an extension or a carport or a gazebo or all that sort of stuff. Oh, gee, that looks a little bit close to the boundary. I wonder if it's approved. Be good to check. Even if it's not close to the boundary, that looks like it was put on after the house was built. Maybe we should check that. So that's the sort of stuff that you can do with your local government searches and things like that. In Queensland and other states, There's the tribunal. So in Queensland, it's called QCAT. So that's things like old matey next door hasn't cut his tree down. I asked him 50 times, so now I put in a QCAT request, and you've got to get his tree cut down, and blah blah blah. That's the sort of stuff you want to look at as well. It sounds pretty daunting, but you've got to remember your solicitor is there to help you go through this process. There's some things that your solicitor might not really be looking at in relation to those searches, and that is things like the electrical inspection. Okay, so if we look at an electrical inspection, that could be getting a sparky to come and have a look and check out the wiring. So we live in an old Queenslander. Being Queensland, you've got to be truly iconic and live in a Queenslander. And really, there is some old wiring in there, and that's something that we need to consider, considering it's an old timber house and there's wiring that looks like spaghetti. So that's the sort of stuff you want to get checked out. Also, when we bought our own home, and it's something that we often suggest to clients, is that sometimes people are really sensitive to mobile phone towers or power lines. And I don't just mean that from they give you a head buzz. I mean that literally when you come to sell the property, they're always going to be talked about by the next buyer. So it's always good to check that sort of stuff, where that local infrastructure is or where it's planned to go. You can door knock neighbours and say, hey, do you know what's going on in the area, that sort of thing. So that's really good stuff to know. And of course, town planning, what's going on in the area. If you're just buying a really small block in an already cut up estate, there's probably not a whole heap of town planning stuff that's going on if they're all the same stuff around you. If, however, you have a larger block and it's maybe you've got 1,000 square metres and there's surrounded by 1.5 acre blocks or something, well, you want to know if that's all going to get cut up into 400 square metre blocks. You want to check into that town planning in that zoning in that area. So that's the sort of stuff to look through. Okay, building construction. Excuse me. Okay, so when you come to do a construction, like just say you're building a house and land package or something, you want to check the developer out, make sure that that the clauses that they've put in the contract aren't extremely onerous on you. There's some clauses that we came across recently on land that we were looking at that suggested that if there was a certain time frame that went past, that we would be obliged to help the developer complete the development as the buyer, so financially help the developer. Of course, that clause was very quickly removed when we discussed that with our solicitor, because there's no way you want to buy a block of land and be trying to help the developer finish the site, right? That's just crazy. But that's the sort of stuff, once again, that was also in New South Wales, and that's the sort of thing that goes on. I think at Queensland is full of cowboys. So you also want to check on the builder. It's a bit different if you know the builder or you've approached the builder or if you used them before. But if you are sort of searching the internet and you've come up with a house and land package, you want to look into that builder. So part of your DD process is going to be, okay, well, show me a home that you built. Where's a display home I can go through? Give me some testimonials of people that have built with you, all that sort of stuff. So that's checking on that builder. You can also jump on the HIA website and check that they're a real legit builder and things like that. You want to look at council plans and applications for other developments in the area and also within that area. So just because it's, say, a master planned area that you're buying into, a new house and land package area, then that doesn't mean that they're all the same. You could already have covenants in the estate. You could have people wanting to get around the covenant, build a carport out the front instead of an enclosed garage, building to boundary. There's that sort of stuff that you want to check out. And of course, the practical side of things with your DD, which probably hopefully you check out before you go to contract, is your end sales values and your rentals, if you're using it as an investment property, and your fixed and non-fixed pricing for your build contracts. So yes, you can get a fixed price build contract, but what's variable in it? Obviously if they hit a rock underneath, that could be a problem. So what are the costs involved in that? Whereabouts are the variations that come? So, is your letterbox, they get the letterbox, but do you have the stand on the letterbox? Like a lot of the fixed price contracts are fairly complete, but you want to go through that. And that's kind of different. But what you really want to look for is the variables in the contract. So it's not necessarily what's not included, because you can go through and sort of compare what's included, not included. What you want to look for is the things that you think are included, but perhaps are a variation if they occur down the track. And that's the important thing to look at on that. Okay, development DD. Now, this is a pretty big one. We're not going to cover a whole heap today on development due diligence because really that could be a very, very long session on its own, and there's a lot of things to go through on that. But we'll just talk about some of the top level stuff. Obviously, contract structuring is quite different when we come to doing the development contract to begin with, and let alone the DD process that sits on the end. So that example of a DD clause I talked about earlier, that long one, is something that you would have in a development contract, and that's you need all those bases covered if you're going to do that. There can also be different time frames or sunset clauses and all sorts of things put in that contract structuring. That's definitely a job that you need to talk to your solicitor about, and you need to discuss with them what you want to achieve out of it, and then they can structure that contract the best way possible. So your next part of D for development is for the DA. All these abbreviations, right? So for the development approval. So does it have a development approval? Well, you'll know that if you're going to buy the site, it's already approved to cut into 8 lots, etc., etc. Or no, but it's zoned residential and it's got one old farmhouse on. Okay, so we've got to go through the development approval process. So what's needed for that? What do I need to put in the contract for that? What do I need to look at for that before I even get to contract? And when I get to contract, what else do I need to do for the DA? Now, this is all part of your due diligence. We need to look at civil costs, the implications from cutting the site up. Where's the sewer run? Where's electricity coming from? Where's water? All that sort of thing. How's the flood levels? Do we need fill? Do we need this? How's the noise? Is there bushfire? There's a whole bunch of things. So obviously you need a good town planner to work with you on your team in that regard. Very much so you need end sales values. Now, this is a little bit more difficult than, say, your building of a house and land package or a duplex like we were just discussing before, because you might think you can cut it up to 8 blocks, this development site you're looking at, but if you can only get 6 blocks, then that's going to affect your end sales values, and therefore it affects the total cost of the project and then the total return of the project, and you need to balance out, is it still viable when you did your figures originally on 8 blocks. So that's end sales values aren't just the value of the actual end product, it's how many you can get and the highest and best use of the site and the economies of scale. So because sometimes, even though each block costs you, if you're talking land sub, you go from 8 blocks to 10 blocks is a better, even though it costs you got to do 2 more blocks and they might be slightly smaller, because you're getting the economies of scale across the site can be better than dropping from 8 blocks to 6 blocks, even though they'd be larger blocks. So it does depend on the outcome, and it can work in reverse too. And of course, there's the council appetite to that. What does that look like? How involved a council want to be, and how happy are they for you to want to put 8 blocks on this site as a land sub. So you need to have a pre-lodgement meeting on that. So all this needs to fit as part of your due diligence on a development site. And look, we've just run over the top of that. It's by no means an exhaustive list, and we didn't intend for that to happen today. We just wanted to highlight some of those areas for you there. All right, we're going to bring in some of the other guys here. We'll add Karen here. Hey, Karen.
Hello.
All right, have you got anything to add to our DD today?
No, I think it is not really done very much when you're just buying your own house. But I think there is a lot more people can do to double check things out. Just recently on the coast here, unbeknown to many, many people, these high voltage power lines have just been whacked through the back of paddocks and yards, and a little bit of government easement land between 2 roads and that sort of thing. It's really important to look at what's around, what the easements are around you. You might be off in the bush thinking you're away from everybody, but there's a little easement there. There's nothing there now, but at some point you could have high voltage power lines or something going through your block. So even for your own home, it's very important to have a good look around. Look on council to see what is happening in your area. There's a sand mine going down the road. Do I want to live next to a sand mine? Those sorts of things.
Yeah, look, that's obviously not ideal, is it? So, and that highlights the question when you look around and you're buying your own home and there you do see those easements and you go, what's on that easement? Oh, nothing, that's just an easement set aside for government use. well, what could they put there?
Yes.
That one, I know that one you're talking about. They literally appeared out of the middle of nowhere. And yeah, it was an unused parcel of land between two fairly major roads, which I guess isn't going to be used for anything else, except, as you've rightly commented on, is that now they're a massive eyesore for all the people that are living on the other side of the road that all of a sudden had cows behind them. Now they have massive high voltage power lines.
Mm. And quite a upmarket residential development went in just a few years back on the other side of the road. So now they have that almost as their backyard, which I can't imagine is a design feature you would put on the front of your advertising campaign to sell your house.
No, I'm sure a real estate agent think of something like, never without power or something like that. Who knows? Yeah. And in relation to construction, house and land and building and that sort of thing, anything else that I've missed there?
No, a lot of that stuff is already pre-packaged. It's just very important to read the fine print. As you said, most house and land packages these days are full turnkey, so everything is included, including your driveway. But that doesn't mean you're going to be happy with everything. It might include a very, very cheap sink, might include very, very cheap basic tiles and stuff, and you might just want things just a little bit nicer. So it's always careful to look at everything they do include, because a lot of these things, in order to keep the price down, is your bargain basement,
Basement, yeah.
mass produced, mass bought common items. And which is fine if it's an investment. You probably don't care if the light switches, look any good or not. But if for your own home, it's very important to read. And it's pages and pages of stuff, but you need to go through and read them all, what they include and what level of quality it is included in all those fixtures and fittings.
Yeah, look, that's a good point, and I think you touch on the reading aspect. I mean, at the end of the day, it's your money, right? You're spending $500,000 on a house or an investment property or whatever it is that you're buying. I mean, people still don't take the amount of time that they should when you are buying. They go and buy a fridge, right? They do more research on a fridge than they do reading the inclusions list in a house and land package. And I think that that's something that needs to change. And I don't know if it's carelessness or if it feels too daunting. But the thing is, if you don't know what you're getting yourself into, firstly, that's dangerous. But if you don't know what's said on the form, you don't know what's on the contract, you don't know what this term means, then you ask. You ask the builder, you ask the solicitor, you ask whoever is involved in the process, because at the end of the day, it's still your money. And the amount of times we see people getting into these deals and go, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Well, did you even read the contract? Did you read the inclusions list? That's the sort of stuff that we need to. So that DD is really, that's why it becomes so daunting to people, because they think that it's out of their control when it's not. It's completely in their control.
And a lot of people visit the display homes and go, oh, yeah, this is what I want. This is perfect. Yep, give me this house. But they don't realize many display homes, and there was a very, very well-known mass-producing company who would have a display home that, was priced at around $250,000, but the home as displayed would often be an extra $200,000 because it had the nice light fittings, it had the nice tiles, it had the nice this, it had the upmarket this, and suddenly you're up 200,000. So people build the house and go, hold on, this doesn't look like the display home, because they didn't read the fine print. They just go, oh, I love this display home. It's not 250,000, it's 450,000. So
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good point. All right, we won't touch on the development one here, because we will do that in a different session, because it's really quite in depth. But look, if there's any questions, chuck them in the side. And look, thank you very much for joining us today on our live stream. This is Xenium Real Wealth. If you want to join our Xenium program, get up to date on all this sort of information, get to know when our lives are happening, all that sort of stuff, there's a link here on the screen in front of you, which is xenium.property/join. So that is www.xenium.property/join. So there's no .coms, no .aus. Just go and join up there, and you will get updated with everything we're doing on Xenium. And that's it From all of us here at Zenium Real Wealth today, thanks for joining us. And if you've got any other ideas for topics and things that you want specifically broken down into these 30-minute sessions, feel free to log on to our live pages on YouTube, Facebook, and currently Periscope. Also, hit us up at hello@zenium.properties. That's an email address, hello@zenium.property. All right, I'm Scotty from Zenium Real Wealth, and I'm signing out for the day. Have a good one.